So we will start with a conversation with Stefani Bonnici. She's over there. But before we start the conversation, I will introduce you to the whole program of today. Then we will continue to have a presentation of success stories of youth engagement in 3 different European cities. And the online part of the meetup will end. And then we will have 2 workshops. One is focused on European collaborations and how, if you have a youth project, where you can find fundings and how you can support your youth project through the European collaborations and etc. And there is a workshop with Budweiser 2028, and we will have an open debate about the youth engagement, youth participation, and we will be very happy if you join us this discussion. And I think that we can slowly start with welcoming Stefani Bonnici on the stage. So this is Stefani. She was born in Malta, but right now she is living in Netherlands, and she has this conference road trip past 10 days, and we are her last stop. So we are very lucky to have you here. And she is a cultural professional. She is great in cultural advocacy and consultancy. Would you like to say something?
Yeah. That's what I'm here for. Yeah, thank you.
Young, bold, and losing hope. This is the title that you choose for today's conversation. Why?
So earlier this year, and I think that's how we got connected, I participated in this project called Pop the Vote. So there's this network called Culture Action Europe. Look them up. They do really great work. And they created this project. So earlier this year, there were the European elections. And they created a project funded by the European Parliament where they invited young artists and young cultural workers from across Europe to apply. And essentially our role was to get a small budget, to get some training. All together, we went to Brussels. Not Brussels like institutions Brussels, but Brussels countryside, which is really nice. And I would recommend that you go. But we all met there, and we were coming from all across Europe. And our role was to promote people to participate in the European elections. So the reason is they realized that not enough people were voting, and they wanted us to use our creativity, our artistic skills, and so on, to then go back to our countries and remind people that they should vote, why, and so on. And like I said, I went to this space having had the experience of working with people who were older than me, who gave me a voice, this is really open. And this is why what I just said before is really important. I thought that that was the way it was. But actually, I went to this Pop the Vote training where I met all these people. And I started to realize that most of these people had an experience that was completely opposite to mine. So a lot of them talked about how they are actually like tokenized, meaning they would be brought onto an organization or onto a project because they were young people. Wow. Like this idea that, wow, young people, really important. And all it was what it felt like to them is that they were young faces to show off that there was diversity in the organization. But then what that meant is that they were given social media roles because, they're good with digital skills. Yeah, okay. That's a good starting point. And when you're young, you cannot immediately sort of go into the roles with most responsibility. That would also be irresponsible to give people responsibility if they don't know it yet. But they would be given these kind of roles and then no opportunity for growth. So no path for actually starting to take on responsibility slowly. So that's where it starts and ends. And a lot of them talked about kind of being underpaid also, and internship. But again, no space to actually go forward from that internship, and no room to fail. That was the biggest thing, I think. Again, like you have to do it right. And the minute you don't do it right, we're going to mention that for the next 20 years. Like you will have failed and that will be what you are. We trusted the young people and that's it. They failed us. So we don't do this again. That was a big problem, and it was a big realization for me. So this was kind of the context I realized on a personal level. But then at the same time, around this concept of democracy, of elections, because of this project, I also did quite a lot of research to understand, okay, why are people not voting? Because we can say that people are not voting and we can get upset about it, but we need to also look inward and say, why do people not vote? And this is where I want to mention also this study by the European Cultural Foundation that I mentioned I work at. It's called the European Sentiment Compass, and every year it looks at how people feel a sense of belonging across Europe. So not just within the EU, across Europe in general. And this year, the title of this report, it looked at people's sense of belonging in Europe during the year of wars and elections. There was a record number of elections this year, and also wars, conflicts, genocide, all of that happening in the background, which really, of course, affects how people look at their lives, how people look at their future, and so on. And the title of it was mentioned Barbie Land. Have you watched the Barbie movie? Yeah. I haven't, but I need to. But basically, the metaphor that they created is that, Barbie comes into the real world and she thinks that everyone loves her because she's empowered and so on. And actually, what she realizes is that girls are really upset because, whoa, you've put up really high standards for us and now we're, having to face this and Barbie, go home. And the report, this European Sentiment Compass, basically says that Europe is a bit like Barbie Land. All these people that believe the EU is this amazing place and so many opportunities, a European capital of culture, such a great project. Yeah, it is. But there's also a lot of people who don't feel that they belong to Europe. And why am I zooming out, right? Because, of course, this is also a European capital of culture. So we're not just talking about Budva, about cities here, but we're also talking about something that is a bit bigger than that. But it is very relevant to how we operate in this cultural field and in the cultural sector. And basically what this report points to are three groups that feel alienated a lot. They feel like they don't belong. And one of those groups is young people. And maybe I will mention, because like I said, numbers are important. Some of what this study found is, I'll read a small extract from this. Despite being less likely to vote than the rest of the population, young people are nonetheless drawn towards non-mainstream alternatives. This often means that many young people end up voting for the radical right. For example, in this European Parliament election, the AfD, which is one of these groups in Germany, came a close second among young German voters. In Poland, Confederacja won the youth vote this year, obtaining 30%. In France, a third of the young voted for Rassemblement National, which is another of these groups. So there's this reality that, and it's also mentioned, young people don't see a future. And another study, another tour that we did across Europe with the ECF really revealed this. Young people feel like there's no future. We don't feel represented in how politicians talk. Yeah, we're told as young people are the future, but then what future, So going back to your question, young, bold, losing hope, this really came to me with this group in Brussels. They are very political. So they are campaigning for refugee rights. They are campaigning for trans rights. They are creating all these different actions because there are values that they have and they want to do all that. But then they're being asked to vote in a system that really doesn't feel like it belongs to them. So that to me was very worrying. And I started to think a lot about this element of hope.
When you mentioned the element of hope, through your talk, I had just this one thought or question in my mind. And that's, why should we have the hope, or is there a hope for us?
That was a question I was really asking myself around this time last year. So around October, November, I think it was also a moment where things were really escalating in general, but we've been feeling in general like things are not good. And I myself, I'm 28, I'm young. And when I was thinking about my future, I was like, I feel really hopeless. I was really losing hope. And I went on ChatGPT, which is what you do. And I asked ChatGPT, I literally talked to it. I was like, I'm feeling really hopeless, but I feel like I need to do something about it. I work in culture. I want something that gives me hope. Can you suggest a book I can read to give me this hope? And ChatGPT told me about this book called Hope in the Dark by Rebecca Solnit. And I went on and I ordered the book and I got it and I started reading it. And basically, long story short, what this book is all about is it comes from a climate activist. So someone who's been very active in this field of climate activism since the 70s. And she talks a lot about the fact that there's been a lot of different movements. First of all, that have started from communities. So when we see change, it doesn't necessarily come from the big politicians. Actually, where it comes is from the ground up. So from communities who believe in something, they come together, they find people like them who also believe in that thing. They try to have conversations, open up dialogue with people who maybe don't see that yet, and they try to bring more people on board. And slowly, a movement grows and it becomes a movement, and eventually it reaches up to the top. And eventually, if we're lucky, the politicians do something about it. Anyway, because I know we're also running a bit tight with time, I really recommend that you read this book. It basically said this. It comes from the communities, but it also comes from knowing that it's not about changing the world all at once. So yes, the issues that we're facing are very urgent. They are huge, humongous. And that is also in a way why we feel a bit hopeless, because there's nothing we can do that can fix this, right? It's too far out. It's too bad. But actually, what it is about is also finding the small ways we can each do that. What I said in the beginning, what you do will influence how someone else acts. Sometimes it's as simple as being kind to one another, because that's something else. We don't feel like there's enough kindness in the world. And when that happens, you just kind of start to feel more alienated, more isolated. And sometimes your action, if you don't feel you can give enough of any other thing, sometimes it's about just being kind to one person. And then that person is going to be kind to the next. And maybe that's how the world becomes a kinder place. But that's also the same thing when it comes to the climate crisis. It's also about all these different things that we care about and that feel out of reach. It's about these small ripple effects that can happen. And on that note, there's a lot more I can say, but I'll just close with this quote from Margaret Mead, who says, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has."
Thank you. We decided that we have some more minutes to share with you results from the workshop that I have mentioned before. There were, I think, people from 14 different countries, something like that. And we were all talking about youth participation, youth engagement, and how to create collaborative space for international collaboration. And Stephanie was so kind to sum up for us the results of the workshop. Stephanie, if you could please.
Yeah. So a lot of it we've already spoken about, but one of the sort of key headings was that we live in times of hopelessness and disillusionment. Like, I think that was one of the things that really emerged from the workshop, this sense of young people who want to do something, but they feel like, yeah, what is it for? There's no real purpose. The idea of polarization and cancel culture really came up. So the fact that we really polarize this us and them thing in anything. So it's left or right political views, it's young people versus old people, boomer versus Gen Z, whatever it is, there's this big polarization and a big cancel culture. So the idea that if you're going to speak up, someone's going to say, no, that's wrong, you cannot say that, or no, why are you saying that? And it's this idea that we don't really speak anymore, we just attack. And of course, that makes all people afraid to speak up, essentially. So that's one thing that we discussed between us in this workshop. And then some of the other things I already mentioned, so I won't repeat, like this idea of tokenizing young people and talking about young people. What really stood out also was that young people care about mental health. And it's the question of, is mental health worse now? So is people's experiences with mental health really worse? Or is it that young people are more aware, so they're talking more about it, they're more aware of it? I mean, I'm talking about they, but probably you guys can also share with us your own experiences. I have my own experience with mental health. And there was a time when I didn't know that this was my mental health playing up. And there was a time when I was aware. And so I showed up differently to the work. I set different boundaries. But I think the reason that this is important in the context of today's conversation is that we need to be aware that people show up with different demands now. So if in the past it was okay to volunteer, to do work for free, to work really long hours, young people, rightly so, are learning to set boundaries. I am learning to set boundaries. If I used to work 12, 14 hours a day in the past, because let's face it, work in the cultural sector is still very precarious, I don't do that anymore. And I set some boundaries. And it was also the conversation I had with Bianka, because I said, okay, I'm going to be traveling from another 2 conferences. Do I join online? Do I join in person? Let's see. That was my decision in the end. But I had to consult my mental health to see if I would be fine with doing it. But I think for today's conversation, the point is we need to think about how young people expect to be seen, how they expect to be treated, how they show up, and what support systems they need if we're talking about engaging young people, either as leaders in cultural organizations or as participants, as people who contribute to the cultural space. We also spoke about not inventing the wheel. We had both young and kind of older participants also, or professionals from the field in the same group. And most of us kind of all agreed that we're not inventing the wheel. So we kind of sometimes think we have new big problems and we need to create an organization to do this. And it becomes very unsustainable, because we're constantly, every generation creates its own thing, but actually what you're doing is dealing with a different kind of problem, but there's always a problem. So actually what we spoke about is that maybe we need to find ways to come together a little bit more, to understand that we're all saying the same thing, more or less. We're just saying it in different ways, with different tools and all that. So let's not set up new institutions, but maybe let's rethink how we function. And maybe that can also be a more sustainable progress for our own mental health as well.